The weeks that followed brought a mixture of emotions for Eli and Sarah. Life on the ranch had returned to its usual rhythm, but there was a difference now, a change that neither of them could ignore. They were learning to navigate this new version of their relationship, a relationship that wasn't defined by simple routines and quiet evenings, but by the constant challenge of finding balance between their different dreams. Eli had always been a man of action. He didn't talk about his feelings much, but he expressed himself through his work. When things got tough, he'd throw himself into his tasks. Whether it was fixing fences, taking care of the cattle, or making sure the ranch ran smoothly, Eli found comfort in the physical labor. It was familiar, it was predictable, and it kept him grounded. But over the past few weeks, he'd found himself spending more time thinking, reflecting, and trying to understand how to share his life with Sarah in a way that felt true to both of them. Sarah, on the other hand, had continued with her work in the community. She had become more involved with the local school board, helping to organize programs for the children and even speaking at town meetings about education and women's rights. Her voice was no longer just a whisper in the background. It was strong and loud, commanding attention, and Eli couldn't deny that he admired her for it. He saw the passion in her every time she spoke, whether it was to a group of children or a crowd of adults. She was making a difference in the world, and in a way he was proud to be her husband. But that didn't mean it was easy. There were moments when Eli would sit quietly on the porch watching Sarah from a distance and feel a pang of uncertainty. He didn't know how to keep up with her. He didn't know how to share in her excitement when the world she was building felt so different from the one he had always known. It was one thing to love someone, but it was another thing entirely to support their dreams when those dreams pulled them in directions that were foreign to you. One evening, Sarah came home later than usual. It had been a particularly long day for her. A meeting with the school board had gone well, but the after-work gathering had lasted longer than she had planned. She entered the house quietly, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. Eli was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing up his meal, but he looked up as she came in, his eyes softening when he saw the tiredness in her expression. "How was your day?" Eli asked, his voice gentle. Sarah smiled, though it was a little strained. "Busy, but good. The board liked the idea of starting a reading program for the kids. I think it'll make a big difference." Eli nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds like you're doing great work." He paused for a moment, his gaze shifting away. "I'm proud of you, Sarah, really." Her face lit up, but she could sense that there was something more behind his words. He wasn't just proud. He was still struggling to understand his place in her life. Sarah had always known that Eli loved her deeply, but she could see the struggle in his eyes when he looked at her now. He was proud, but there was a hint of something else, something that told her he wasn't sure how to share in her joy, how to support her when the life she was building didn't always fit with the life he had imagined for them. "I'm glad you're proud," she said, sitting down beside him at the table. She placed her hand on his, a soft gesture of reassurance. "But you're part of this, Eli. You're part of everything I do. I need you to know that." Eli turned to her, his heart full of emotions he couldn't quite put into words. "I want to be part of it. I really do. But sometimes I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I don't fully understand. I love the ranch. I love the life we've built here. But it's different now, isn't it? It's not just about us anymore." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know. And I'm sorry if that's been hard for you. It's never been my intention to pull you away from the life we've built. I want us to grow together, Eli, not apart." The sincerity in her voice reached Eli's heart. He had been so caught up in his own doubts, his own fear of losing the quiet life he had always cherished, that he hadn't seen what Sarah was trying to tell him all along. She wasn't trying to change him. She was simply asking him to grow with her, to embrace the idea that love and ambition didn't have to be separate. "I've been thinking a lot," Eli said after a long pause, his voice steady but soft. "And I think I've been scared. Scared of what this change means for me, for us. But I see now that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We don't have to live your dream or my dream. We can live both." Sarah's eyes softened as she squeezed his hand. "You mean that?" Eli nodded. "Yeah, I'm willing to try. I don't want you to feel like you have to give up what you love. And I don't want to lose the peace I've always found here, but I want to find a way to make it work. We can have both. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were still challenges ahead. moments when they would disagree or feel overwhelmed by the pull of their separate dreams. But in that moment, Eli and Sarah both realized that love wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about being willing to take the next step together, even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. Over the next few months, Eli and Sarah worked to find a balance between their dreams. Sarah continued to push forward with her work, but she made sure to spend more time on the ranch, helping Eli with the daily chores and sharing in the quiet moments that he loved. Eli in turn supported Sarah's efforts, attending her school board meetings and helping with her community projects. Slowly, they began to build a life that was both quiet and vibrant, peaceful and full of purpose. There were still times when Eli felt unsure, moments when he questioned whether he could truly keep up with Sarah's growing ambitions. But with each passing day, he saw the joy in her eyes when they worked together, and that joy was enough to reassure him. He didn't have to be like her, and she didn't have to be like him. They simply had to be themselves, together. The love they had for each other was the foundation that held them steady as they navigated the changes in their lives. And though the journey ahead wasn't always easy, Eli and Sarah both knew that as long as they walked it together, they could face whatever came their way. They had learned that love wasn't just about finding peace in the quiet moments. It was about finding harmony, even when the world around them was loud and uncertain. And in that harmony, they both found a future that was even more beautiful than they had ever imagined. The weeks following the wedding felt like a whirlwind, and Eli couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. What had started as a day of celebration quickly turned into something far more complex than he had ever expected. He and Sarah had left the church, now officially married, but something had changed. The passionate declaration she made at the altar still echoed in his mind, and it left him feeling torn between his love for her and the quiet life he had always dreamed of. At first, Sarah had been excited. She dove into her work, helping the children at school and continuing her efforts in the community. But something felt different between them now. Eli found himself spending more time alone on the ranch, working longer hours not because he had to, but because he didn't know how to be with Sarah in this new space they had created. She wasn't the same woman he had proposed to her, and in some ways, neither was he. Sarah had always been supportive, gentle and kind, but that bold voice she'd used at the wedding, the one that challenged everything Eli had imagined, was still there. She wasn't hiding it anymore. It had become clear to him that she had a fire inside her, a fire that couldn't be ignored. She didn't want to just be Eli's wife. She wanted to stand beside him, but on her own terms, and Eli, as much as he loved her, wasn't sure how to navigate this new version of their relationship. Days on the ranch became more lonely, though not in the way Eli had expected. There were still the daily chores, the feeding of the animals, and the upkeep of the land. But now there was an emptiness in the house when Sarah wasn't there. She was busy with her teaching, taking on extra projects, speaking up in meetings about things that mattered to her, and all the while, Eli stood by, unsure how he fit into her world. He loved her enthusiasm, admired her drive, but it also made him feel small. Her world was growing bigger and his was staying the same. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep orange, Eli sat on the porch, looking out over the land. He had a moment of peace, the kind he usually cherished, but today it felt different. His mind wandered like it had been doing so often lately. Where did he fit into Sarah's world now? She had shown him a new way of living, one full of passion and purpose, but how could he possibly keep up? His thoughts were interrupted by Sarah's voice as she walked up the path toward the house, her footsteps light but determined. She had been working late at the school again, staying after class to help organize another community event. As she approached, Eli could see the spark in her eyes, the same spark that had drawn him to her in the first place. But now, instead of excitement, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What did she want from him? Was he enough? Was she satisfied with the life they had, or was she still searching for something more? Sarah smiled as she reached the porch, but Eli couldn't bring himself to return the smile. His face felt heavy, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on him. Sarah's eyes narrowed and she sat down beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. "You've been quiet lately," she said gently, her voice soft but firm. "Is something wrong, Eli?" Eli hesitated. For weeks he had been carrying around his doubts, unsure of how to express what he was feeling. He loved Sarah more than anything, but he couldn't ignore the unease in his chest. He couldn't pretend that everything was as simple as it had been before. He didn't know how to say it, how to explain that the life he had imagined with her was no longer the same. It was as though they were living in two different worlds, each one spinning in its own direction. "I don't know," he finally said, his voice low. "I think I'm just lost. I don't know how to fit into your life, Sarah. You're becoming something else. I thought we were going to have a quiet life here, with the ranch, with the land. But now it feels like everything's changing." Sarah's eyes softened. She took his hand in hers, her fingers warm against his. "Eli, I'm not asking you to change who you are," she said, her voice steady. "I love you for who you are, but I need you to understand that I have dreams too. I can't just stand by and watch my life pass me by. I've always had a passion for teaching, for helping others, and I need you to support me in that just as I support you." Eli looked at her, his heart aching. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the depth of her conviction. He knew that this was something important to her, something that she couldn't simply ignore. But the quiet life he had always imagined, the one he had always felt comfortable with, seemed so far away now. How could he support her dreams when his own dreams seemed so different from hers? "I don't want to hold you back, Sarah," Eli said, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't know how to fit into your world. You're moving forward, and I'm still standing here trying to hold on to something that doesn't seem to fit anymore." Sarah's face softened, and she leaned closer to him. "Eli, I don't want you to feel like you're holding me back. But I also don't want you to feel like you have to be the same person you were before. We can find a way to make this work. We can build a life together, but it has to be a life where we both feel like we're growing. You don't have to give up the quiet, but we have to make room for each other's dreams. We both have to be willing to change just a little." Eli let out a slow breath, the weight in his chest lifting just a little. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Maybe they didn't need to give up everything they had planned. Maybe the life they wanted didn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe there was a way to keep the quiet, peaceful parts of life while making room for the dreams Sarah had, the dreams she couldn't let go of. For the first time in weeks, Eli felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew that. There would be hard days ahead, times when they would struggle to find balance. But as he looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with understanding and love, he realized that it was worth the effort. Love, he thought, wasn't about fitting into a mold or sticking to one path. It was about supporting each other even when the road ahead was uncertain. "You're right," Eli said softly. "We'll figure it out together." As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Eli and Sarah sat side by side on the porch, hand in hand. The storm that had been brewing inside Eli for so long had finally passed, and the world around them seemed just a little brighter. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough to take the next step. The morning of the wedding arrived, and Eli could feel a storm brewing, not in the sky but in his heart. The sun had risen early, painting the world in golden hues, but the feeling of anticipation hung thick in the air. He had spent the last few days in a haze of preparations, helping to set up the small church in town, making sure everything was in place for the ceremony. But despite all the excitement surrounding him, Eli's mind felt clouded with doubt. He had never been one to talk openly about his emotions, but now, as the wedding day loomed, it seemed that every question he had about his future was pulling him in 1,000 directions. He stood at the back of the church, adjusting his tie nervously as his best man, Matt, checked his cufflinks and gave him a reassuring smile. Eli tried to return the smile, but the tension in his chest made it hard to do anything but breathe deeply. He glanced toward the front of the church, where the congregation was beginning to settle into their seats. The place was packed. Family, friends, and townsfolk all gathered to witness the beginning of his and Sarah's life together. It felt surreal. This wasn't just another day. This was the day that would change everything. As the church doors opened, Eli's heart skipped a beat. The soft sound of a violin filled the air as Sarah walked down the aisle, her white dress flowing gracefully behind her. She looked beautiful, radiant even, and in that moment everything about the world around Eli seemed to fade away. There was only Sarah, walking toward him with a smile on her face, her eyes sparkling with the kind of love that Eli had never known he needed. But as much as he wanted to embrace the joy of the moment, something was nagging at him. There was a sense that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Sarah reached the altar and they exchanged a quick, nervous smile. The preacher began to speak and Eli could feel his nerves building. He had never been good with crowds, and the weight of the moment pressed on his shoulders. He turned his attention to Sarah, trying to focus on her, but his mind kept wandering. It wasn't just the wedding that had him uneasy. It was the future. He had spent years imagining a quiet, simple life, but now, with Sarah beside him, everything felt different. She was more than just a woman he loved. She was a force of nature, and Eli wasn't sure if he could keep up with the fire in her heart. The preacher's voice began to blur as Eli's thoughts took over, and it was then that something unexpected happened. A loud clap of thunder rang out, followed by a sudden gust of wind that shook the windows of the church. The storm that had been building in the distance had finally reached the small town, and for a moment it seemed as though the world itself had decided to make its presence known. The sound of the storm outside seemed to echo inside the church, and Eli could feel the tension in the room grow thicker. But then, something even more unexpected occurred. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting through the rising noise like a force of its own. "I won't be silenced," she declared, her words loud and clear, ringing out across the church. The sound of the storm outside seemed to fade as her voice filled the space. All eyes turned to her and Eli felt his heart race. He wasn't sure what was happening, but in that moment, Sarah's presence seemed to command the room. Her voice wasn't meek or uncertain. It was strong and sure, a reflection of the woman Eli had come to know. A woman who was ready to speak her truth, no matter the consequences. "I love Eli," Sarah continued, her eyes meeting his. "But I have dreams too. I have things I want to do, things I want to say. I won't just be a wife in the shadows, quietly standing by. I have a voice and I will use it." Eli stood frozen, his mind racing to catch up with what was happening. The quiet life he had imagined for them both was suddenly unraveling before his eyes. This wasn't the woman he had expected to marry. This was a woman with her own passions, her own desires, and her own purpose. She wasn't just here to support him. She had her own path to follow, and it wasn't one that fit neatly into the life he had built. The room was still, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of Sarah's breath and the distant rumble of thunder. Eli didn't know what to say. The words he had rehearsed for weeks, the vows he had practiced in front of the mirror, seemed insignificant now. How could he promise a quiet life when Sarah had just shown him that she was anything but quiet? For the first time since he had met her, Eli felt like he was standing on the edge of something new, something bigger than the life he had imagined. It was terrifying, but at the same time it was exhilarating. Sarah's voice had cracked through the stillness, and with it, she had shattered the box he had built around their future. She wasn't asking for permission. She was demanding to be seen, to be heard. Eli swallowed hard, trying to process everything. He had known that Sarah was different, but this was something entirely new. Her words weren't just about wanting more from life. They were about taking control of her own story. She was no longer the soft-spoken woman he had thought she was. She was a force, and that force was going to change everything. The preacher seemed uncertain, glancing back and forth between Eli and Sarah, but Sarah wasn't finished. She stepped forward once more, her eyes never leaving Eli's. "I will stand beside you, Eli," she said, her voice steady now. "But I won't stand behind you. We will build a life together, but we will build it with both of our dreams, not just yours." The silence that followed was thick, and Eli's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. He loved Sarah more than anything, but the thought of what she was saying was overwhelming. He had imagined a quiet life with her, a life where they could live simply and peacefully. But now Sarah had shown him a different kind of future. She wasn't asking for a simple life. She was asking for a life that was as vibrant and full of passion as the fire in her heart. For the first time, Eli realized that the future he had always dreamed of might not be the future that was right for them. His heart was torn. He wanted to keep Sarah, but could he truly give her the life she needed? Could he give up the peace he had always craved in order to follow her on a new, unknown path? The storm outside raged on, the sound of thunder now blending with the pounding of Eli's heart. He stood there, frozen in the moment, unsure of what to do next. The choice before him was no longer about the life he had imagined for them. It was about finding a way to make room for the woman who had just spoken so boldly, so powerfully, in front of everyone who had gathered to watch them begin their journey together. Sarah had made her voice heard. and now it was up to Eli to decide whether he was ready to listen. The days leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Eli couldn't deny that he was nervous, though. He tried to keep those feelings hidden. He had always been a man of few words and even fewer emotions. He wasn't the type to talk openly about his feelings. But as the date of the wedding drew closer, he found himself filled with an unexpected mix of excitement and unease. The more he thought about it, the more questions ran through his mind. What if he wasn't ready for marriage? What if this changed everything he had ever known about his life? Could he truly adjust to a new way of living, one that included someone else in every moment, every decision? Eli had never been one to shy away from hard work. He was the type of man who woke up before sunrise, worked until the sun set, and found satisfaction in the quiet, solitary hours of his day. His life had always been simple. He had his routine: wake up, tend to the animals, fix whatever needed fixing, and enjoy the peace of the land. There had been no need for more, and the thought of disrupting that routine was something he hadn't really considered until now. His thoughts about Sarah, though, were different. He had fallen in love with her in a way he never thought was possible. Her kindness, her gentle nature, and the way she cared for others had drawn him in from the beginning. But beyond that, there was something about the way she looked at life. Sarah wasn't like any woman he had known. She had a spark in her eyes that told him she wanted something more than just a quiet life on a ranch. She was passionate about teaching, passionate about helping others, and passionate about making a difference in the world. Eli admired that about her, but he also feared it. He wasn't sure how that fiery spirit would fit into the life he had so carefully planned. There were moments, like when he saw Sarah laughing with the children at the school, or when she spoke with so much conviction about her dreams, that Eli felt a growing sense of doubt. Was he really enough for her? Was the simple life he had to offer enough to keep her happy? He had always been content with the idea of a quiet marriage, one where they could raise a family, take care of the ranch, and spend their days enjoying the peace of the land. But Sarah wasn't like the other women in the small town. She wasn't looking for just a peaceful life. She wanted to make a difference. She wanted more than just the routine of ranch life, and sometimes Eli wondered if that was something he could give her. The night before the wedding, Eli found himself alone in his room, pacing back and forth. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp on the bedside table, casting long shadows across the walls. He ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. There was something inside of him that felt uneasy, something he couldn't shake. It wasn't about Sarah. It was about the life they were about to start together. Matt, his older brother, had always been there to offer advice when things got tough. Eli had always respected Matt's opinions, even if he didn't always agree with them. That night, Matt found Eli pacing the floor, and with a knowing look, he leaned against the doorframe. "You're not getting cold feet, are you?" Matt asked, his voice teasing but soft. Eli shook his head, trying to force a smile. "No, I'm just thinking a lot. Wondering if I'm ready for all this." Matt walked into the room and sat down on the edge of the bed. "You've known Sarah for a while now. She's a good woman, Eli, and she loves you." "I know," Eli replied, his voice low. I never thought about how much my life would change when I married her. She's not like other women. She has dreams, passions, things she wants to do that don't fit into the quiet life I've built here. What if I can't give her what she needs?" Matt was quiet for a moment, as if considering Eli's words carefully. "Change is hard, I won't lie to you. But if you love her, you'll find a way to make it work. Life on the ranch isn't just about what you do. It's about who you're with. Maybe it's time to open up to the idea that Sarah might bring a little bit of fire into your quiet world." Eli's shoulders sagged, and he sat down beside his brother, his mind still swirling with doubts. "I don't know if I can do that, Matt. I've spent my whole life doing things my way. What if I lose myself in the process?" "You won't lose yourself, Eli, you'll just grow. That's what marriage is about, isn't it? You and Sarah finding a way to grow together, not apart." Eli didn't respond right away. He just stared at the floor, his thoughts a tangled mess. He had never been one to embrace change, especially not the kind that was so big. But Matt's words stuck with him. Maybe it wasn't about giving up his quiet life. Maybe it was about finding a way to share it with someone else. And maybe, just maybe, that someone was Sarah. Later that night, after Matt had left him to his thoughts, Eli lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the soft creak of the wooden beams as the wind blew outside. He thought about Sarah, Her gentle smile, her bright eyes, and the way her voice had always made him feel like everything would be okay. He loved her more than he had ever loved anyone, and that truth was undeniable. But was love enough to build a future on? Was it enough to take the leap into the unknown? Eli closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would. But one thing was certain. He couldn't spend his life wondering what could have been. He had to take that leap, even if it was into the unknown. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and the first rays of light touched the earth, Eli felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew that he had to trust in his love for Sarah. He had to trust that the life they would build together would be worth the challenges, the uncertainty, and the changes that were to come. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. As Eli dressed in his best suit preparing for the wedding, he couldn't help but feel a small spark of excitement. Maybe he wasn't ready for everything marriage would bring, but he was ready for Sarah. He was ready to take the leap, to start this new chapter of his life with the woman he loved. And, in the end, maybe that was all that mattered. Eli Carson had always lived a life of hard work and independence. For as long as he could remember, the wide-open plains of Texas had been his home, a place where he could hear the wind whisper across the tall grass and watch the sun set in a vast, never-ending horizon. His days were filled with the rhythm of ranch life, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and caring for the horses. But as much as he loved the quiet solitude of the land, there was always a longing in him, something more than just the endless work and silence. It was the idea of having someone to share it all with. Eli wasn't the kind of man to seek out attention. His rugged appearance and stoic personality made him a man of few words. His friends knew him as dependable, steady, and hardworking. He wasn't one for big parties or loud gatherings, preferring the peaceful evenings when he could sit on his porch, sip on a glass of iced tea, and let the silence of the evening wash over him. He had learned long ago that the land didn't need to be rushed, and neither did he. His dreams were simple. He wanted a steady life, a family to come home to, and the quiet comfort of knowing that he had earned every moment of peace he could get. It wasn't until Eli met Sarah Thompson that he truly began to imagine a future with someone else. Sarah was a schoolteacher from the nearby town, and she was everything Eli had never expected to find in a woman. She was kind and soft-spoken, yet there was an energy about her that caught Eli off guard every time they spoke. He had first met her at a local church event, where she had been helping organize a fundraiser for the school. Sarah wasn't like the other women Eli had known. She wasn't interested in fancy clothes or gossiping over the latest news. She cared about people, about the children in her class, about the community, and about making a difference. There was something deeply genuine about Sarah, something that made Eli take notice in a way he hadn't with anyone before. Their courtship was slow and deliberate, much like the rhythm of Eli's life. They spent quiet evenings together, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah had a way of making Eli feel heard, something that hadn't come easily to him. He was used to keeping his thoughts to himself, but with Sarah, it felt natural to open up. She listened with genuine interest, and her thoughtful responses made Eli feel like maybe there was more to life than just the work he had always focused on. Her laughter, soft and warm, was something he began to look forward to, and her presence brought a kind of calm he hadn't realized he needed. It wasn't long before Eli knew that Sarah was the one. Despite his growing feelings for her, Eli was hesitant to rush into anything. He had seen relationships come and go, and he knew that love wasn't always as simple as it seemed. The quiet life he had worked so hard for meant more to him than anything, and he didn't want to lose it. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to fit perfectly into the life he had imagined for himself. She wasn't a woman who needed excitement or constant attention. She valued the same things Eli did: a peaceful home, a loving family, and the comfort of knowing that the simple things in life were often the most important. When Eli proposed to Sarah, it was on a warm evening under the stars, with nothing but the sound of the crickets in the background and the soft glow of the moonlight illuminating her face. He hadn't planned for it to happen that night, but the moment felt right. His heart was racing as he knelt down on one knee, offering her a simple ring. Nothing fancy, just a symbol of his love and commitment. Sarah had said yes without hesitation, her eyes shining with happiness, and in that moment, Eli knew that everything he had ever wanted was within his reach. The wedding preparations began soon after, and Eli found himself swept up in the details. It wasn't that he didn't care about the wedding. He just didn't understand why it had to be such a big production. He wanted to marry Sarah, and that was enough for him. But Sarah had a different vision. She was excited about the ceremony, about making it a special day that they would both remember. She had always dreamed of a beautiful wedding, and Eli could see that this was important to her. So despite his initial reluctance, he let her take the lead, trusting that she knew what was best. As the days passed and the wedding date drew nearer, Eli found himself feeling a mix of emotions. There was excitement, of course, but also a sense of unease. It wasn't that he didn't love Sarah. He did more than anything. But he had grown accustomed to the quiet, predictable life he had built on the ranch. Marriage, to him, meant change, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. He had always believed in the value of stability, and now, as he stood on the cusp of a new chapter in his life, he couldn't help but wonder what this new life with Sarah would look like. Late one evening, a few days before the wedding, Eli found himself standing on the porch of his house looking out over the ranch. The sun had just set, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink. The stillness of the land was comforting, but it also made him feel more alone than ever. He thought about the life Sarah and he would soon share, about the ranch that had always been his world. Was he ready for this? Was he ready for the changes that marriage would bring? As he stood there lost in thought, his brother Matt came up beside him. Matt had always been the more outgoing of the two, never one to keep his thoughts to himself. He placed a hand on Eli's shoulder and said, "You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you?" Eli nodded. "I'm just not sure if I'm ready. I've got this life I've worked hard to build, Matt. It's simple, quiet, just the way I like it. And now it's all about to change." Matt gave a soft chuckle. "Eli, change is scary, but it doesn't have to mean losing what you've worked for. Sarah is a good woman. She's not here to take that away from you. You've got a good thing going, but maybe it's time to let someone else in." Eli wasn't so sure, but he appreciated his brother's words. Deep down, he knew that the quiet life he had envisioned didn't have to be a life without love or connection. But as the wedding drew closer, the reality of what that would mean started to sink in. Eli wasn't sure if he was ready for the changes marriage would bring, or how it might reshape the quiet life he had so carefully crafted. But one thing was certain: his love for Sarah was real, and he was about to find out what it meant to truly share his life with someone else.